Hello and welcome to Pickles Garage. Today we are working on my 1979 Z28 Camaro and we are going to be replacing the power steering pump. You can find these on Classic Industries and other sites that replicate old original parts. Pretty widely available online and they're not too expensive. But let's go ahead and dive right into the specifics. So for mine, I got mine on Classic Industries. Out the door, it ended up being about like $210 with shipping, tax, and everything, and it's going to be part number NP6902. But it's got everything that you need. It's got the fittings. Everything's plugged up because they do kind of pre-lube it, which is awesome. And then you're going to have the front here where we're eventually going to put on our wheel. So that is the part. It's listed for 1978 and 79 GM vehicles. So let's go ahead and start throwing it on. So now under the hood, we can see our old one that we're replacing. There's a couple different bolts that we're going to go ahead and remove. And naturally, we're going to have to get this belt as well. And I'll go into the specifics and the sizes here in a moment. The reason I am replacing my old one here is it seems to be leaking out of just about everywhere. I was always seeing a big puddle under my car when I would stop. It wasn't because I was overfilling it or anything, but there was always grease and liquid around the cap. And then when I replaced some of these hoses down here, the fitting never went in really all that well. And so I think the threads might be damaged. And then there was always some fluid from the front as well. So I'm not sure if the bearing itself is going. So I'm going to replace this. I'm naturally going to replace this hose too because it's a little hard. And that way we'll be better off here in general, because really you don't want this to go dry because then you'll start damaging this. And this is also costly to replace. Once again, kind of a pressurized system here. And so this kind of works in a way similar to your transmission. It needs the fluid for it to work properly. You don't want to grind anything in here. It's a lot less fun to replace than this will be. So keep an eye on making sure that if you are constantly going down in level on this, then you just need to replace it. It's not going to naturally burn itself out. It should always have roughly the same amount that you put it in for very long periods of time. So let's go ahead and dive into the replace of this. So your tools for today are going to be a ratchet naturally. If you have an adjustable one like this, it can be helpful for those tighter spaces, but if you have a regular one, that should work just fine as well. You probably won't need a breaker bar, but if for whatever reason you start fighting a bolt, it's a lot easier to replace and a lot cheaper to replace a breaker bar, and you get that leverage that you need. You're going to need a 9/16 for your socket for essentially all of these. Extension might help some of the more tight areas. Mine requires a 17th socket. You probably could get away with a similar size and yours might vary slightly, but mine just works better now that I've replaced the hose with size 17 metric. And then you'll also need a screwdriver for that hose that I mentioned. So this is all you need for the initial aspect. I'll let you know if anything else pops up, but this should get us through the repair just fine. So we're going to go ahead and remove the fittings first, just because we want this to still be hard in place while we try and remove these. So I'm going to start with this. This is that size 17 metric for me that I mentioned. It might be slightly different for you guys. This was a replaced part and it was definitely different than the one I had got. And then we're also going to remove this hose right here. Now, if you came up from underneath, you could see that there is going to be a place for you to remove it here, but because I'm removing all of it anyways, I'm going to make it easier on myself, and I'm going to remove this side right here so I could pop this straight back. So we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Naturally, mine's effectively empty, but if you think you have any fluid left in your reservoir, you're going to want to put a bucket down there just to kind of catch any fluid that might be spilling out. So let's go ahead and dive into that. So with this fitting, I always like to do almost a full hex here. That way, you know, you can get kind of more surface to grip on because they do gall up fairly easily. So you'll see I do have a little bit, but clearly not very much that's dripping out. So all I did was break it loose, and then I did the rest of it with my fingers here. So that is now removed, and then we're going to go back to this one, which once again is just going to require a screwdriver here for me to loosen. And you'll see it's not even really all the way up on the bead, because I remember when I first replaced it, I was trying to go to a car show and I was kind of doing some last minute stuff, not the best work that I've ever done, and I just wanted to get it back on and not really leaking, but not necessarily fully secure. So I'm going to push that back, and then I'm going to use a screwdriver, which will probably require both hands for me, just so I don't bend this, and I'll pry that back off. So as mentioned, you can use a screwdriver just to pry it off. You can also get tools like this, which sort of, you just kind of go in here like this, and you sort of walk it back and around. And so sometimes that makes it a little easier, but these can oftentimes poke right through it. So if you're going to replace it, then I would recommend it. If you're not going to replace it, you might end up damaging it, and that would suck. All right, so we are back to the front, and now we're going to be focusing on removing the belts, which goes hand in hand with just removing these bolts. So this sort of centers it, but you'll notice this one right here, it goes in a slot, and that's actually where you're adjusting that sort of tension that you have on here by moving it back. Same thing on this side. You have that bolt where it's going up and down in a slot. And so just to get this out of our way, we're going to go ahead and start with those two. I already loosened this a little bit. I'm going to leave that on just so that it doesn't fall all the way forward while I'm messing with things. But like I said, we're going to go ahead and remove that and remove that. And those are both 9/16. So this one decided I wanted to be a little bit more special. I do have a wobble extension, so I was able to get a decent grip on it, but just because most people don't have that, more people have wrenches, I would recommend a wrench on this. So this is a ratcheting one, but you'll see it's starting to descend a little bit. So that is officially loose enough to at least get the belts off. There you go. We'll just set that aside for now. And so it doesn't interfere with the other side because this has two belts. But we'll set that aside, and then these are essentially all finger loose now. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the remainder of these, and then we should be ready to pull this straight forward. And just like that, it is gone. Now you'll notice that each of these have a lock washer on them, so I would recommend replacing those. I think this was the only one that didn't have one. I don't know if it originally did or not. But just keep track of the, like that, just lose your bolts. But keep track of the bolts, make sure you know which one goes where, and keep track of the washers. And like I said, I would recommend the replacement of the lock washers. Will I? Maybe, hopefully. But let's go ahead and go back to our old one real quick. So what you'll notice with our new one versus our old one is there is a wheel on our old one. So for whatever reason, they just don't give you the new wheel. So we're going to go ahead and remove this wheel so that we can put it on our new one, and then we'll get going. All right, so in order to remove this properly, we have our pulley puller and installer kit. So this one is from Thorstone on Amazon as well. You may notice that the wheel is all bent. That's just because I tried to take a few shortcuts. I'm honestly, I'm not even going to show you, but I basically tried to do it with just some more common tools that people may have, and it just didn't work. So unfortunately, you're going to have to go ahead and get the kit. It's the proper way to do it anyways, but let me show you how to set it up. So from the kit, we're going to go ahead and grab this right here, and we're going to grab this ring, and then we're going to grab this right here, the puller body, and we're going to grab the center screw. Now this is going to screw into the top of this, like so, and then this is going to grip around the base here, like that, and then this will rest on the inside so that as this screws this way, this will pull it straight up while pressing the center, but I'll show you with it actually connected. So just like that, right? And then you can use this ring to guide it together like that. And then I didn't really have a good wrench that seemed to work, but it looks like it's a size 21, like that. So you'll have a wrench holding this part, and then you're going to use a size half socket for the top, and then you're going to hold this side, and then you're going to tighten this, and that is going to hold the pulley with this coupler while this drives down into it, removing it. Alright, unfortunately I officially give up on trying to remove this wheel. It is just stuck on here. You can see this tool is starting to spread, so I'm just going to end up damaging something that doesn't really deserve that. So I have a new wheel anyways that I bought, so we're going to go ahead and move on to that and move on to the next step. But if you're able to get yours off, great. Otherwise you might just have to replace the whole thing. So sorry. Let's move on to the next part. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and remove the bracket. So that is 1, 2, and around here 3 that we're going to go ahead and remove. And then each of these are going to be 9/16. The longer one is going to go in this top, or this side hole, and then these two will go right here. So let's go ahead and clean it up, and then we'll throw it on the new one. But first, a brief word on the pump and the pulleys themselves. So what you'll see is I got this one on Classic Industries. This is a Saginaw pump, and so it's Saginaw, and it has this key right here, this sort of notch, and the diameter of this is a lot smaller. So when you look up, for mine it's a 1979 Camaro, and for this specific one, this is the part that it recommended for me. But there's actually two different types of power steering pumps. So there's the Saginaw, and then there's also the press fit. Now when you just look up, at least for my year, the pump, you're going to mostly see this style of pump, but when you look up the pulley for the same year, you're mostly going to see these press-on, and so you'll see that the diameter is far too large, and so this is supposed to be kind of friction held, and this would have fit perfectly on my old one that I had, but it does not fit on this part. So you kind of get recommended two conflicting parts, and so definitely keep an eye on that. You can 100% find the press-on pumps, but you have to specifically look for it. The Saginaw, I believe, was from the 60s mostly, and it sort of carried over into the cars and trucks. The press-on was more the 70s, but again, this is what was recommended to me when I put in my specifications, and it did not have the correct pulley when I looked into the same information. So what you need to do is, if you get this, you have to specifically search for a keyway pulley. So let me pull this out. It's essentially the same thing, except it has that sort of notch that is going to press right in and hold in place, and then it will work just the same. But just something to keep in mind if you're going to be replacing your pump and your pulley, to make sure that you either get a pulley that has a press fit and you buy a press fit, or you get a Saginaw style pump and you get a keyway pulley. So keep that in mind. Alright, so issue number 2 to look out for. So the Saginaw that I showed just a bit ago actually had supply issues in 1979, which was the specific one that I needed, right? And so everything is advertising and saying this is what they had for 1979. However, apparently if your vehicle was made towards the end of 79, then what they actually started using was this version that was on the 1980 Z28 Camaro. And so this is a press-on, very similar to the one that I pulled off, but you'll notice on this Saginaw one that was advertised as a 79, the bracket doesn't line up perfectly to the holes, and that is because the holes are actually clocked slightly, whereas this is more even. So that is another thing to check on before you go ahead and buy. If you have a 1979, you notice that yours is a press-on, then odds are yours is actually going to be a 1980 power steering pump rather than the one that's advertised as a 1979, and this is a press-on. So I will show you that tutorial real quick with the tools that I have. So we're going to go ahead and replace our 9/16 bolts. Remember, this is the longer one. You'll notice that some of the fittings are missing on your new one, and so basically you have to take from the old one, from the rear, it's going to be an 11/16 bolt that you remove from here, and we'll go ahead and replace it on our new one. And now we'll press on our pulley here. Okay, so we're gonna start by making sure that everything is clean, all these surfaces are clean. I did a very light coat of grease on the inside, just that initial part, just to make that first slide pretty easy. You're then going to find the part here of these installation screws that fits the best, and you're going to want to make sure that the bolt is seated like so. And then we're gonna go ahead and put this on, line it up, and then let me set up the tool. Alright, so now you're going to go back to the removal tool that you had earlier. You're going to thread that onto the top, like so, and then we're going to do the washer, and then we have a thrust bearing. And then we're going to go ahead and put this on as well. And so this will give even pressure to our whole system here. And then we're going to hold the top, so it looks like, and move you up a little bit. It looks like roughly half worked for this, 21 worked best for this, so unfortunately I don't have the exact right sizes for you. I just know that this is what worked best for me. But now we're getting nice even pressure for it to go ahead and seat. And then you can check on it as well. You just have to sort of lift up the tool, and we're looking for the end of the snout to be essentially flush with our new pulley. So that's what we're going for. I will stress again the importance to get the tool. If you try and hammer it or use a sort of press, the way that these are designed, it's not designed for that sort of impact, and it will just damage it, and then you're going to end up leaking anyways. So definitely spend money on either buying or renting the tool. So keep that in mind, but we're going to keep cranking away until we get this flush. Okay, there we go, fully pressed. You will get to a point where it starts getting loose as you're cranking, and that's just because it's going to start unscrewing itself. So once you're flush with this, you are good. Make sure it's not binding on anything around here, but that is now fully seated, and we're ready to go back in the car. So let's jump to that right now. Alright, so once again, these are 9/16, so you have your long bolt here, and you have a nut right here, and then you have another bolt right here. Now, right here and right here are where you're getting your adjustment. So once you make sure that your pulleys are lined up, so everything is seated properly, go ahead and put your belt on here. And then what you can do is you can use something like a breaker bar. There's also specialty tools, but you're just going to slide it kind of right here, and that's where you'll push to get your tension. Right? You just push it away from yourself, and then with your free hand, you're going to go ahead and tighten this bolt, and then tighten that bolt right there in the middle of the screen, and that will be where your tension comes from. So just check to make sure that you have a good firm hold here. There shouldn't be much bounce here, if any, but you also don't want it so tight that you really can't get any sort of push in it because it could snap. So just make sure it's nice and tight here. And then you'll go ahead and finish off with this one, and then we will replace our cap. You're going to have to rob it from your old one or buy a new one if you got them like this, because most of them don't come with this. And then we'll go ahead and do our fitting. So below, if you remember, I'm going to go ahead and replace that. That is just your return line. So go ahead and replace that. You're supposed to replace it every 5 years or like 30-ish thousand miles. So I would say go ahead and replace that, and then we're going to do our hard line last, and I'll show you that here in a bit. Alright, so like I said, we're going to go ahead for our high pressure line here. Your new pump will come with this O-ring that is going to go in first, and it's going to be let me see if I can get it on camera, but basically it's just going to be at the tip here. And so now that I dropped it, you're just going to go ahead and screw this in with it on the tip, and then you're good to go. And then go ahead and fill it full of your power steering fluid, the one recommended by the manufacturer, and you are good to go. So thank you very much for watching. Have a great rest of your day. Feel free to like and subscribe.